Hello everyone, welcome back. Well, some of you, many of you, welcome back. We'd like you to take a look at a film.
If you are reasonably sure that you'd be hired for a job based on your ability and qualifications, take a step forward. If you ever went on a family holiday, take a step forward. If you were born in the UK, take a step forward. If you've ever felt that there was not adequate or accurate representation of your group in the media, take a step back. If you feel comfortable walking home alone at night, take a step forward. If you can legally marry the person you love regardless, if you or your parents have ever gone through a divorce, if you felt you had adequate access to healthy food growing up, if you can see a doctor whenever you feel the need, take it. If you'd never think twice about calling the police when trouble occurs, if you've ever been bullied or made fun of based on something you can't change, take a step back. If there were more than 50 books in your house growing up, take a step forward. If you were ever offered a job or work because of your association with a friend or family member, take a step forward. If you've ever felt uncomfortable about a joke or statement about your race, ethnicity, class, gender, appearance or sexual orientation, but didn't feel you could confront it, take a step back.
I think, there are certain factors, I suppose being a white male may have played quite a large influence in it, but it was interesting to see some of the gaps there were.
It made me aware of factors that I wouldn't normally think about. I had moments where it felt a bit embarrassing.
Weirdly enough, I thought the people who were moving ahead felt uncomfortable. I probably didn't feel uncomfortable staying where I was, but I was quite surprised by that.
I can see how privileged I am in comparison to some of my colleagues, and that doesn't make me feel good. And I'm also surprised at my reaction as to how uncomfortable it makes me knowing how far behind me they are.
"206 people at the conference have also done that questionnaire, and we have the results from that to show you. I should start, before I go into those results, can I just say that Helena Morrissey may come in at, I'm waiting for a signal, may come in at any second now. She has been delayed and she is going to join us on stage. So can I ask you to ooze sympathy because she will clearly be very flustered as she joins us on stage, but she is going to try to.
She's never flustered.
No, she's not flustered often, actually, it's true. So, the results from us. As you can see, interestingly, and I think that Saka in the last session hit this nail on the head for us, we are quite a privileged group of people. We also did some analysis in our privilege questionnaire of gender diversity. About a third female, 2/3 male. As I said, 206 people completed this. I'll also put up the other graph, which is ethnicity. When I look around the room, I'm not quite sure that this represents the full spread across the conference. And we wondered, when we looked at the results, whether actually it was a self-selecting group that had filled in this questionnaire, people who were perhaps more interested in diversity and privilege. But I'll let you draw your own conclusions. Do you have anything to say on that, Chris?
About whether people self-select?
Yeah.
Well, I think, well, as Julian said in the film, it makes you think about things you don't always think about. I'm certainly aware that I have unconscious biases, and the thing about unconscious biases is they're unconscious. So as I wrote in the piece I wrote for the monograph, you know, I have to recognise that I am, in one sense, a sexist, racist, homophobe. Well, you might think I don't mean it, and I kind of don't. I mean, I brought my running shoes just in case you turn nasty. I don't think I'm that unusual in that respect. I mean, if you're not a sexist, racist, homophobe, that probably means you're either much younger than me, which seems to apply to increasingly large numbers of people as time goes on, because my kids don't have the same bias as I have, or I think it perhaps means you just haven't thought about it that much. So I think it's something we just need to raise our awareness about.
Now, Chris referred there to our group of essays, or monograph as we affectionately have called it, from leaders in the pensions industry. It's actually on the PLSA stand if you haven't already picked up a copy. And all of us contributed to that monograph, and it contains some of our experiences and our views on diversity. And I guess we all scored very highly on the privilege front, but nevertheless we have some interesting stories to tell about diversity. Chris, your essay talks particularly about how diversity helps us deliver better pensions.
Well, I think delivering good pensions is an incredibly tough job. I hope you agree, Lesley.
Certainly do.
So to actually achieve it, we know we need to earn really pretty good long-term returns from the assets that are entrusted to us. And I think for that to happen, everyone needs to do the best job they can. So that does involve making best use of all the talent that's available, not just saying, well, we'll use a bit of it. And it means ensuring that you do the best strategic thinking you can do. And that's true in my organisation, on my trustee board, but it's equally true in the investment management organisations that we employ, and in the companies whose shares we invest in. Everyone needs to be on top of their game. And your
advisors.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's why I think it's so important.
Okay. Lesley, why does diversity matter from the regulators? Well, or even from your personal point of view?
Well, let's start with the regulator's perspective. I mean, clearly we are interested in great decision-making by trustee boards in particular. And what our research shows us is that 82% of trustees are male and only 18% female, so a slightly different gender balance to what you showed us, Lesley. You see the great diversity of name on this panel too. Only 8% of trustees are 40 or under. Okay, and only 1 in 10 chairs of trustees are female. And I think what strikes me, therefore, and I've worked in the financial services industry as a regulator for over 20 years now, is that the trustee board sector is a little bit behind the game here and is going to face an increasing challenge, obviously from a diversity and inclusion perspective in terms of what that means in decision making, but there's actually just a demographic challenge there as well about an increasingly ageing population of trustees. So clearly, what I'm interested in is avoiding groupthink, as Chris suggests, of getting many different perspectives, getting better decision making as a result. And as I've said, it's equally important that it's not just about the trustee boards, it's about the advisors, it's about your regulator as well. We take diversity and inclusion very seriously at TPR. From April, we're going to be subject to the public sector equality duty. Now, when I arrived at the regulator at TPR, because I had already been subject to that duty at the FCA, I assumed TPR was automatically subject to it, but it isn't. Now, that means two things. Obviously, as an employer, we have to focus on issues of diversity and inclusion in terms of what are called the 9 protected strands, which include obviously gender, disability, but also things like religion, sexual orientation, parent and caring responsibilities, that type of thing. But we not only have to think about it as an employer, we also now have to think about it in our regulatory policy making. And we are working through how we will do that, how we will reflect that, how we will create the audit trail for that. But all of this must be about better decision making, but also I think about making sure people can come to work and give of their best. So how do we get people, in the language is bring their whole self to work, because they will feel a hell of a lot happier and they will deliver far better if they feel comfortable in the workplace, whatever their particular characteristics.
Okay, thank you. One of the criticisms I think that has been thrown at me by several people around the conference has been that I might be in danger of excluding male perspectives, and that isn't what I want to do at all. My own essay reflects on how my career has been helped by some really strong male sponsors. In fact, I've probably only been helped by strong male sponsors. Chris, you're white male, youthful. What are your thoughts on, I guess you're the boardroom archetype. What do you think about that view that men, if we carry on this way, we're in danger of excluding you?
Well, I do feel slightly apologetic sometimes, especially sitting here today. But you know, I can't actually change in other than marginal ways. I suppose I think what I was saying earlier is just too important for me to not get involved. You know? I'm not going to be able to pay my members' pensions unless we get the right strategic thinking across the investment chain. So I have to get over myself, don't I, and just get on with it.
Okay, interesting. Yeah.
I agree with you, Lesley. I mean, I've been helped by sponsors, male, very, very successful and very helpful male sponsors during my career. I absolutely recognise that. But then I hear statements about the, you're in danger of excluding the male perspective, and the raging feminist comes out of me at that point, and on the kind of, well, we've had 2,000 years of it your way, and 364 days of the year are International Men's Day, so, deal with it. So, and then I have to remember, all the great things I have learned from men in my career. I just think what I would say is think about your audience and about who you're trying to talk to about this. And one thing we found when we worked very strongly on diversity and inclusion when I was at the Financial Conduct Authority is think about who you're talking to. You're talking to a group of highly analytical people who love data. So let's get into the data. And I used to be one of those people who never filled out diversity questionnaires because, to my mind, I would succeed on my own merits. People would judge me by the quality of the work and the quality of my leadership. Over the years, I became persuaded that being a leader in an organisation, you had to show the way, and one of the ways you showed the way was by contributing things like the questionnaires, diversity questionnaires, so that you could get accurate data on what the situation is. And what I would say to leaders in organisations, chairs of trustees, is get the data, whether it's recruitment data to work out where the blockages in the recruitment process are coming, whether it's the occasional survey to actually get to the bottom of how people are feeling about working in your organisation. It is hugely valuable and it helps you deal with the sceptics.
Okay. Chris, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit.
Again?
Well, there's only 3 of us on the bench here.
Okay.
What are you actually doing? So you're obviously very... What are you actually doing about...
My trustees asked the same question, actually.
Diversity in your organisation. So you're clearly a big... you feel diversity is very, very important. What are you doing to make sure that you've got a diverse team, and how do you... Yeah.
Well, I would say we're certainly only a work in progress in that regard. But we are taking the steps we think we can do to ensure we're conscious about our behaviours. And so, for instance, it's quite a small thing, but when we're recruiting now, we ensure that the CVs are degenderised. So you can't tell what the person's background when you look at their qualifications. I mean, when they walk through the door for the interview, that's a little harder. But at least you have more chance of getting a diverse list of candidates. So it's things like that, really. And we are a pretty flexible employer, I guess. We encourage different working practices amongst our people.
Do you think that's important? The flexible working was when we had a pre-run of this session when we launched the monologue. For some of you will have been there, and the discussion kind of quite quickly went on to flexibility of working, and I kind of tried to haul it back to diversity. Do you think you can't separate the two?
Well, people respond to incentives, don't they? So it's important to understand the incentives and the signals that you're giving out to the people that work with you, because they will respond to them, and that might mean they go and work somewhere else.
I think there's no doubt that I think it's fairly proven that the availability of flexible working helps retain and regain women to the workplace. And I think that is a fact. I have observed it myself. It is certainly a feature of why a number of people choose to work at the pensions regulator. For example, we have a board which has a majority of women and an executive committee which has a majority of women. I think it can also create a particular culture in an organisation in terms of building up the trust between employees and so on, between employer management and employees and so on. So I think it has some very positive effects in that one. But I think it is particularly relevant in the gender diversity. But as we're all, I think, aware these days, and as the Privilege film in particular shows, this isn't just about gender. It's much, much wider than that. And interestingly, the 9 protected strands that we're going to be looking at within TPR, social mobility is not one of those backgrounds, but is the emerging strand within the wider debate on inclusion.
Okay.
I mean, I'm much more interested in cognitive diversity, I guess. It is trying to get the best strategic thinking, the best consideration of what the risks might be that the average white male hasn't thought about. It's ensuring that breadth, really. And in that regard, Lesley, you mentioned trustee boards. I feel that trustee boards, and mine in particular, already have quite a lot of cognitive diversity built in, and that's partly due to the MNT structure.
Yep, absolutely right.
So my trustee board is 50% employer reps, 50% employee reps. They're from very different backgrounds, and that's very evident in the conversations we have around the table.
And that's a great start, isn't it? And it then becomes, in some cases, quite complicated to overlay other diversity considerations on top of that and try and meet all the issues. And I can see in particular it must be very challenging for small localised schemes and that type of thing as well. I mean, I think it's fantastic that the PLSA are starting to highlight this issue and to think about what can be done. Example, assistance with recruitment, that type of thing. It's so much better it comes from you than it comes from us at the regulator. You know, it's not something you can impose upon people. This is a state of mind thing, and you've got to persuade and nudge and so on. It's not just a tell thing. So I think the fact that an organisation like the PLSA has chosen to lead on this issue is really, really important.
Okay, that feels like time to have the lights up and ask for, I think maybe not, well, questions for the floor if you have them, but actually comments. I think it would be great if you could share some experience with your peers around the room about what you're doing to broaden the cognitive diversity of your trustee boards or your organisations. Gentleman over there.
Harry Lowe, Chairman of Home Group. I have a slight difficulty in all of this. I'm very pro-diversity. However, it would seem to me that in the same way that Daesh have hijacked Islam, the female population have hijacked diversity. Every time we talk about diversity, it becomes a male-female thing, and it's not. And for me, one of the great things that came out of the previous session was the diversity of thought. I thought that was a superb concept, and the one which Chris has alluded to within trustee boards I think it's beginning to exist, and it's very, very valuable.
Thank you very much. I think we would agree with that. I'm not going to defend the position on men and women. There are many forms of diversity, many aspects to diversity, and we've been expanding to incorporate those. But perhaps someone else is, I think there's someone, Sarah. What?
Sarah Smart, TPT. When we last did, I'm interested on Chris's comment about depersonalising, taking names off CVs, because when we last did our trustee elections at TPT, we took the names off the CVs when we sent them out to the members to vote on and called them candidate A, candidate B, candidate C, etc. And actually the majority of the rationale for that was that we had some candidates with non-Anglo-Saxon names, which were quite complicated to read, and we felt that might promote some unconscious bias of people not voting for them. We had quite a significant backlash from members about that, formal complaints about it, because people wanted to know whether candidates were male or female, because they wanted to vote for males, etc., or wanted to vote for females, which was exactly the reason actually why we did it. But it was interesting how strong some people felt, the backlash about it. And so it is quite difficult to hold your line. I wonder whether there's anything collectively we can do to educate the overall pension population of the benefits of things like that.
It all starts, doesn't it, from the premise, as we've said, that a diverse board, a diverse set of perspectives is a valuable thing. All we can do is try and prove that such things work and get the outcome that we are looking for. Some people will always object to it. We can't please all of the people all of the time. So I think we do have to try some of these initiatives, but as I said also, we have to measure whether or not they do the trick. But all of it, of course, depends on whether you actually accept the starting point that is a desirable thing to have. I think the vast majority of people in this room probably do, or they wouldn't be here.
Helena, I'm really sorry about the trains.
Well, it's all your fault, Chris, obviously. I know, I was thinking, I'm going to have some words. Anyway, I'm happy to jump in on that. Particularly, I caught half the question. I mean, I'll guess the other half. I've got to make this next few minutes count to see. But I think one of the problems with diversity as an issue is a lot of people think of it as political correctness still. I think it's not just a neutral issue that I think actually does put people off. And I think rephrasing the issue in terms of the collective intelligence of the group, and there are some really great pieces that have been written, one in particular that I love, that Harvard Business Review sort of defended or challenged the researchers, was professors at another institution had done a piece of research where they weren't expecting it to be around diversity. They just challenged. They had groups of very intelligent people, and they had groups of slightly less intelligent people based on IQ scores. And if you had a homogeneous group of very intelligent people, they repeatedly underperformed the groups that had diversity and had lower IQ, actually. And you had to add, the best bit about this research was you had to keep going with adding women into the group till you got to 70% before you sort of peaked out with the women. But the point was that was because to do with social skills and listening to each other. And I found it, the people who were skeptical, because the question was around skepticism about it, people who are skeptical, you've got to get some way of getting across to them. And try new ways, have someone come in and talk about the power of this diversity of thought.
Thank you. For those of you who are, as Richard said in the last session, shy, there are questions coming through on the little iPad here. One of them, well, I think this is a statement rather than a question, but trade unions have been promoting diversity agenda for years, so why has it taken so long to become a theme within the pensions space? I think that's a very fair comment, and hopefully, therefore, a very good reason for welcoming the fact that we have finally got around to talking about it.
We are behind.
Yeah.
Though I'm not going to monopolise the whole conversation now. I've finally joined it, but I do think, because that was one topic that I was going to address when, as part of my sort of the opening part, where is our industry? And I think we have fallen. It's ironic in lots of ways because obviously we're trying to look for the future and investment opportunities and be very, not just current, but forward-looking. But I think we are now behind, field of engineering, the field of medicine and medical research, which perhaps less so than doctors, but actually the research side has been very male-dominated and very, not just the gender thing, but obviously the socioeconomic background and other types of diversity. But I think we really have to be bold now, even to play catch-up.
I was invited to a dinner at St Mason's a week ago. Some of you may have been there. We had a great to and fro. 27 people in the room. The only 2 women were me and Carolyn Saunders, the senior partner from Pinsent's. Every single trustee representative in that room was male. That was quite intimidating. The only other industry I've encountered that sort of situation in would be IT 5 or 6 years ago. So very interesting. I do think we have a way to go here. And it's for all sorts of reasons. I think employers can do a lot here. For example, one thing the FCA has always done is look at its employer-nominated trustees as a real career development opportunity for people, picking out talent, and in particular, looking at the makeup of the board, looking at how it can help make that more diverse in its employer selection.
My drive is quite different, though. It's not about, we're behind society here, although that's not irrelevant. As I said before, it's about how are we going to generate those good long-term returns that we need. I mean, frankly, it used to seem a doable job, right? And since 2008, I think what we found is investment returns just don't seem to be there for the future. I mean, ironically, the markets are at all-time highs, but that kind of makes the case in a way. So I mean, we've retooled everything about the way we do our investment decision-making over the last couple of years, from governance to management to the way we're thinking about our team. So all those things have to play their part if we're going to get anywhere near achieving our long-term goals. So for me, yes, I'd like to make the world a nicer place, but frankly, that's not my job. My job is to pay pensions to people. So I'm only really interested in this in a professional sense because I think it will help with meeting that goal.
It's a bit chicken and egg, and I guess one of the things is how do we do that when now it's all very current, but we are a bit behind. And I think it's becoming harder for us as an industry to attract best talent, male or female, privileged or not so privileged. I mean, it's just not the top choice. And again, we have to, because we focus ultimately on returns for our clients, if we're going to have the best confidence of reaching those, we've got to do something about this. And that's why I keep going back to it's not about political correctness, it's not about being nice to people, it's not about changing the world for its own sake, it's actually driven towards results.
The other thing I would say is it's not easy and it takes time as well. I mean, many of the initiatives you've been sponsoring, for example, in the wider corporate governance world, like the 30% Club, have been running for a while, and it isn't easy to change this. It takes a number of years, and I think you're right. The gentleman over there who said we tend to focus a lot on gender diversity, and we do, and I'm conscious of that and some of the things I've said today. But we do have to recognise it is a wider challenge now, and some of the other areas of diversity that we want to secure are even more difficult than the gender side of things, and we'll need some very imaginative ideas if we're actually to make progress there.
There's another comment from the floor.
So I had a bit more of a question, kind of playing off of the theme you just brought up, is that I think that while it's all a great idea and it's incredibly important to focus on diversity, when you look at the actual industry, it makes it very challenging. So how do you attract new talent into the industry that provides diversity, not only through students coming out of college, but also sort of looking outside the industry, possibly parallel industries, where you could attract people in who have differences in thought, background, etc. And sort of part two of that is can someone like the PLSA or an association really lead a charge and bring the industry together in order to do that?
Well, I think Q, the Diversity Project, hopefully some of you have seen the stand here on that. This was started last year, officially launched only last November, with about 40 different organisations, so including the PLSA, and Lesley and Joanne are both heavily involved in leading a specific element about trustees and asset owners, but trying to create from the CFA Society, Investment 2020, that's doing a great job in terms of encouraging more diverse apprenticeships, so not necessarily people who've gone to university, and particularly looking at socioeconomic diversity, but creating this joined-up approach that you allude to. And I mean, one of the areas that I think you just mentioned there, but I mean, if we're looking at, say, socioeconomic background or different types of thinking, then you won't get it if we just keep going to the same Russell Group universities, and yet no one firm has really got the bandwidth to go around the country, going up and down the country, looking for different at different universities. But a lot of us have got a relationship with one or other non-traditional universities. So again, by pooling ideas, by pooling things that work, I mean, the firm I'm going to be joining in a couple of months, Elgin, has done a 50-50 by 2020 program for a few years and actually have shown some real traction throughout the business, not just in the investment team, but in other senior positions. But I do think coming together, and that was one of the learnings from the 30% Club that I took, was if you have a sense of urgency, a sense of sort of also a bit of trial and error, so, working out what does work and what doesn't, and then this really joined up sort of, concerted effort with a deadline, really, then you can make things change. We are being ambitious with the diversity project, though we're not saying it's just gender or just socioeconomic background. We're trying to tackle every single aspect of diversity because, frankly, the industry needs all sorts of ideas.
And if I can chip in from a PLSA point of view, we are an organisation that brings our members together and allows them to talk to one another and network through events like this. So yes, I think we can be helpful in leading the charge on this.
And being a role model.
There's Simon over.
Simon Lee from M&S. I suppose this is probably a bit of an observation, but may develop a little bit. There was a comment earlier about the fact that the pensions industry was some way behind, say, the trade unions in its adoption of diversity. And I suppose, I think from a DB perspective, and when we particularly think about trustee boards and their composition, we do have to remember that these are historical artefacts now. And, if you're looking at your members from whom you might draw your member-nominated trustee directors, who are they? Well, they're these historical artefacts too. The nature and composition and diversity of those members reflects the recruitment policies that were undertaken by the business back in the past, and indeed the types of work that business undertook. Clearly our scheme is somewhat different to many, and I'm personally, of course, a bit of a minority because I'm male in M&S, and within the senior leadership group we're very female as an organisation, and in fact the pension scheme is best described as sort of pink collar because we have so many female members. But I think we should be careful not to push too back at trustee boards that have a lot of male members on them, because that may just reflect the membership of the scheme and the history of the organisation which supported it. That shouldn't stop us, however, trying to, as much as we can, find other ways of doing that, but maybe we need to rethink a bit about how we draw representatives of members as well as from the company.
I think that's a really, really good point. And one of the things I was thinking about in advance of this session is, if you can't achieve the, as it were, via the easier route, numbers of representatives, makeup of the board of trustees, that type of thing, what else can people like the PLSA do to help trustees, say, perhaps particularly of smaller or localised schemes, as we talked about, to get that kind of diversity of perspective? What other tools are available? How do they, what are their advisors helping them with, that kind of thing? What else could be done there? And I think that's something we could usefully turn our minds to as well. What tools, what techniques can we help with in that regard?
It's an observation, really, because it hasn't really come up in the discussion. So obviously, the stats that we saw earlier, we need to swing to a place where we're getting more cognitive diversity, however we define it in terms of the diverse makeup, whether it's socioeconomic or male, female, or whatever it is. But one of the things is we need training, because what I can see as a risk is we sort of box tick in getting a more diverse makeup of the boards and the executives and so on. But we don't train people how to interact with people that don't think the way they do.
Absolutely.
And therefore we just go through a sort of temporary little surge where we all pat ourselves in the back and then wonder why it all starts to fall apart. And I went to a conference on diversity, a whole day session last year, and it opened up my eyes to the unconscious biases that we all have because we are a certain type of background, a certain type of male, female, and so on. And what you find is even the way you do appraisals or the language you use or your body language, things that you just don't pick up on. You know, for example, females write longer emails than men, and men then trump them all down and say, this is far too long, cut it back. And what you're doing is saying your work's not very good. And you don't think that you're doing stuff like that. So what I would really encourage, I think the PLSA is a good place to do this, is the training that we will all need, male, female, whatever, to harness the best of each other to get the cognitive diversity that we want.
I think that's a really great point. I think you can't tack these things on to existing infrastructure and ways of making decisions, or as you say, managing people. It has to be really embedded. I've started to think of this issue as sort of like we use technology. We don't just sort of tack it on for an hour a day. We're kind of in and out of, you know, different networking opportunities and communicating with each other and stuff. It's kind of become, we've changed the way we operate. And I think, again, this is something I've observed in the corporate world where there was a big push, obviously, to have more women on boards. But actually, I think, and this is something of a self-critical statement, at the same time, people didn't say, actually, how do we make those women able to be themselves when they get there, not just to fall in line with the way we've always done this. Because otherwise, there's no point to diversity, ultimately. We end up back where we started. So I think it's a really powerful point, a very strong thing that we need to do at the same time.
It certainly resonates with what we hear in terms of when we talk to trustee boards and so on about the types of training that they feel they need, which is the softer skills end of things. As you say, I think the PLSA is really well placed to assist with this. The other thing we observe is the importance of the role of the chair of trustees in ensuring good decision making in trustee boards, and that's something you will see the regulator focusing on quite a lot over the coming year. In particular the influence of chairs and also of professional trustees. So I think the chair here has a real role to play. And I think I would challenge those of you who are chairs to think about that and to see, something I found as a leader is people need permission. They need overt permission to think and to talk about these things. They're perhaps sometimes worried about talking about them in the workplace. 10 years ago, it was incredibly difficult to talk about your religion in the workplace. To, for example, stand up and say, for example, like I do, that I am a Christian. That was incredibly difficult, and it was discouraged by the HR function, you know. But there's some really good progress in that type of thing. But leaders still need to give that overt permission for people to engage, overt permission for people to attend training in wider corporate entities, that type of thing. So let's not underestimate the role of the chair of trustees here as well.
I don't want to shy away from the pokey comments that are coming through on my iPad. Astonished apparently that Lesley, and I think that must be this Lesley, the other Lesley, yes, not me, not this Lesley, that claim that the PLSA is leading when it's so far behind the curve by around 25 years. So I hope we've answered some of that. We do need to run to catch up. I acknowledge that, and I think all of my colleagues at the PLSA acknowledge that as well.
I'm afraid I'm relentlessly optimistic, so I would praise you for at least getting on the road. You know, that's.
I like that.
It's good.
So you can do my appraisal anytime, Lesley. Any other comments from the floor?
So I had a couple of observations from professional trustees. So I run a professional trustee firm, and really just a couple of stories and a plea for help or observations from the panel. The first one is a couple of years ago for a master trust board, we went through an open and transparent advertising process to find trustees to join a large master trust board. And inevitably about 60%, 70% of the CVs that we were sent were for men. Despite that, we deliberately set out to have a 50-50 long list of candidates, and we got to a 50-50 long list of candidates. Every single one of the women dropped out through the process, before even interview, for various other reasons. They felt, for whatever other pressures were on their life, that they couldn't go through with it. And I was left with the choice of one woman to select from, which I didn't think was very diverse. So, what can we do about that sort of background so that we can get a more robust process that allows us to select from a decent pool? The second story is in relation to my own business. So I run a trustee business. And I'm very proud of the fact that around about 50% of the people, no, in fact, exactly 50% of the people that I've recruited in at a trustee level are female. All of our client directors are absolutely fantastic. But I'll tell you a story. One of my first hires as a new trustee was also our youngest. She was 28-year-old female, and she is bloody marvellous as a trustee, with all due respect to our other female trustees in the audience. But despite that, 60, 70, 80% of the CVs I get are from males. How can I get through all of this so that I can address the imbalance?
Well, I recognise the story. I think we have similar stories in our organisation around trying to recruit a more diverse range of executives. And you're relentlessly optimistic. I think we just need to be relentless, actually, in ensuring that we don't settle for the easy solutions sometimes. And we're looking to expand our investment team at the moment. So it's an opportunity, as I see it, to redress gender balances. But nevertheless, you have to aim off from we must get absolutely right the best person for each role in a technical sense. It goes back to the Harvard research that you quoted, Helena. The strongest team isn't necessarily comprised of the strongest individuals.
And it's true, obviously, in the sporting world as well as intellectual worlds. It's how people gel together.
Which isn't to say, by the way, that I think men are better than women. I can see the journalists getting their pens out. It was merely responding to your point, Richard, that the pool we draw from is still biased, and it will remain so for the foreseeable future. So if we want to get the best outcomes, we're going to need to aim off from that.
One practical idea, it might not work for your circumstances, but I have had some positive experience. I was part of the government had a women's sports quango, I suppose. I'm not sure what the technical word for it was. I'm obviously not a woman in sport, but I had, they invited me to help them with the women in governing bodies on sports. And actually what we did was we had a fair. It was a half day, and basically the chairman of national sporting governing bodies who wanted to have more, in this case, more women on their governing bodies of the sport, so it's like netball, rugby, it was a whole gamut. Came along, talked about what it involved, we had a panel discussion and so forth, and then the women that were invited, it was a combination of inviting people that we thought would have the capability, the interest, but also the enthusiasm. They came and learned about it, but also there was a bit of a matchmaking thing. And afterwards, actually, it was a very well-attended event. I think about 200 women came along, and 25% of them got, within the next year, as we ran it again the following year, a place on a national governing body. Now, having a sort of like not a careers day, but sort of like this is what it involves being a trustee. I think a lot of women wouldn't even know about what is involved. Women who might have the capabilities intellectually and possibly the ability on a commitment one as well, because it's a bit disappointing your experience of them all dropping out. But just a suggestion that might make this point.
So I'm going to need to stop the session there. I will conclude by saying we are 25 years behind the curve. Thank you to whoever said that. And but we're there now. We're starting, and our cup's half full. If you believe what Lesley tells you, so let's try from here. And it feels to me like there is quite a lot of will in the world, in this room and in the world of pensions, to make this happen. So thank you very much to our panellists, and if you would bear with us, there'll be a couple of minutes whilst we bring our last speaker onto the stage. Thank you very much. Oh, that's all right.